The fluorescent lights inside the Pendleton Military Equipment Depot hummed like something alive, casting everything in a pale yellowish wash that made the concrete floor look like old bone. It was the kind of building that had never been designed for comfort. High ceilings, exposed steel beams, the smell of motor oil and gun solvent, so deep in the walls it would never come out. Folding chairs had been arranged in rows across the main floor, maybe 60 of them, and nearly all were filled by the time the doors opened at 8 o'clock that Tuesday morning. The men who came were not there for sentiment. They were contractors, logistics buyers, a few private security firms with clipboards and polo shirts. 2 representatives from a canine training outfit in Virginia had driven overnight and sat near the back with matching coffee cups and matching expressions of professional detachment. A retired master sergeant, who now ran a narcotics detection company out of Phoenix, occupied the front row, arms folded, reading glasses perched low on his nose. Nobody paid much attention to the young woman who slipped in through the side door at 8:14. She was 26, maybe 27, with dark brown hair pulled back tight and the kind of posture that suggested she had been told to stand up straight so many times it had become involuntary. She wore a grey jacket over a plain white shirt, dark jeans and boots that had seen better years. She carried nothing but a small envelope and did not look around the room the way first-timers usually did. She walked directly to an open seat 3 rows from the front, sat down, and fixed her eyes on the platform at the far end of the room where the morning's inventory was being staged. Her name was Faye Dolan. Nobody there knew who she was. She had driven 4 hours from 29 Palms that morning, leaving before the sun came up, stopping only once for gas and a cup of coffee she barely touched. She had not slept well. She had not slept well in 11 months, not since the notification team knocked on the door of the house on Mesquite Road, and she had known, before they even opened their mouths, what they had come to say. Her father, Chief Warrant Officer Leonard Odlin, had been killed during a training exercise gone wrong in the Mojave. He was 51 years old. He had served for 27 years. He had been 3 months from retirement. He had also, for the last 4 years of his service, worked alongside a Belgian Malinois named Koda, a military working dog with a citation record that most human soldiers would envy and a temperament that had become, by the end of his active duty, something the handlers at the depot described in careful diplomatic language as complex. What they meant was that Koda had stopped trusting Mosbal after Leonard died. What they meant was that Koda had not allowed anyone to put a leash on him without a fight since the week of the funeral. What they meant was that the dog was now standing in a reinforced kennel at the back of this building, and that in approximately 40 minutes he would be lot number 7 on the morning's auction roster. Faye knew all of this because a handler named Corporal Pete Chabot had called her 2 weeks ago, voice low and careful, as though he were passing contraband across a fence. Pete had worked with her father for 8 months before Leonard died. He felt, he said, that she deserved to know what was happening, that Koda's service record had been formally closed, that the dog was being processed out, that the auction was scheduled. He did not tell her what to do with that information. She figured it out herself. The envelope in her lap held $4,200 in cash, every dollar she had saved since taking a second job at a restaurant in town 6 months ago. She had not told her mother where she was going that morning. She had not told anyone. The auctioneer, a lean man in his 50s named Gary Holt, took his position at the front platform at precisely 8:30. He wore a bolo tie and moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had sold farm equipment and storage units and, now, apparently, military surplus. He went through the housekeeping quickly, bidding increments, payment terms, no returns on any item once the gavel came down. Then the items began. The first 6 lots moved without incident: 2 K9 transport vehicles, a set of tactical gear in varying states of use, a specialized detection kit still in its original packaging. The Virginia men took the detection kit without blinking. The retired master sergeant in the front row won the gear. Clipboards clicked. Numbers were called. It felt like any other Tuesday. Then Gary Holt looked down at his sheet, paused for just a fraction of a second, and said, Lot 7, military working dog, Belgian Malinois, male, 9 years of age. Tactical designation, active service record, multiple deployment citations. Retired from active duty, February of this year. He looked up. Handlers will bring him out now. 3 men came through the side door. 2 of them held catch poles, long aluminum rods with loops at the end, the kind used for animals that could not be approached directly. The third walked slightly behind, one hand resting near his hip, watching the dog the way you watched something that had surprised you before and might do so again. Koda came out fighting the poles, not out of fear. That was the first thing Faye noticed, and it was important. There was no cowering in the dog's body, no flattening of ears, no tucked tail. He moved the way a locked door moves when someone is pushing hard from the other side. Contained, but not defeated. He was larger than she had expected. His coat was the color of dry desert brush, darker across the saddle of his back, lighter at his chest. A scar ran along the left side of his jaw in a clean, healed line. His left ear had a small triangular notch in it, the kind that came from something catching in a wire. His eyes were amber and absolutely alert, scanning the room with what could only be described as evaluation. He was not afraid of the people watching him. He was assessing them. He did not like what he found. He pulled against the pole on his left, and the handler braced and held. A murmur moved through the folding chairs. The man in the front row uncrossed his arms and leaned forward slightly. The Virginia pair exchanged a glance that had a specific kind of meaning in it, the kind that meant they were already recalculating. Gary Holt cleared his throat. Lot 7, he said again. We'll open bidding at 500. Silence. Then from the front row, 500. Gary nodded. 500, do I hear 6? 6. One of the Virginia men, not looking up from his clipboard. 7. The front row. 8. Virginia. A third voice from somewhere in the middle of the room. 900. The pace was different from the first 6 lots. Slower. People were watching the dog more than the auctioneer. Koda had settled into a stillness that was not calm. He stood at the full extension of both catch poles and watched the room with those amber eyes, and something about the quality of his attention made people shift in their seats. 1,000, Gary said. Do I hear 1,100? The front row, 11. The middle voice, 12. 13. Virginia, quieter now, like a man doing math in his head. 1,500. The front row, skipping an increment, which Gary accepted without comment. The middle voice dropped out. Faye had not moved since Koda came through the door. She sat with both hands in her lap, the envelope beneath her palms, and she watched the dog the way she used to watch him through the chain-link fence at the kennel on base when she would visit her father on weekend afternoons. Leonard would stand on the other side of the fence and tell her things about Koda. Not the official things, not the citation record or the search stats, but the small things. That Koda liked to sleep with his chin on Leonard's boot, that he had a specific sound he made, not quite a bark, when he thought Leonard was taking too long to open a door, that the dog had once sat down in the middle of a training exercise and refused to move until Leonard acknowledged him properly, which Leonard described as the most professionally embarrassing and secretly impressive thing he had ever witnessed. She had not seen Koda since her father's memorial service. The dog had stood at attention during the flag ceremony with a stillness that did not look trained. It looked like grief. 1,800, Gary called. Do I hear 2,000? 2,000, the front row, flat and certain. The Virginia man set down his clipboard. He leaned over and said something quietly to his partner, who shook his head. Virginia was out. Gary looked around the room. 2,000. Do I have 2,100? Nobody moved. He gave it 5 seconds. 2,000 going once, 2,100. Faye's voice. The room turned. She had not meant to say it loudly. It was simply how she spoke, clearly, without inflection, a habit from years of being Leonard Dolan's daughter and learning that uncertainty in your voice invited people to talk over you. She sat with her spine straight and her eyes forward, and she did not look at the people looking at her. Gary Holt blinked. 2100 from, he looked at her, clearly having no idea who she was. From the young lady in row 3. Do I have 22? The front row, after a pause. 22-23, Faye said. 24-25. The man in the front row, she could see him clearly now, thick-necked, wearing a company badge she did not recognize, turned slightly in his chair to look at her. It was not a hostile look. It was the look of someone encountering an unexpected variable and deciding how much weight to give it. 26, he said, turning back. 27, 28, 29, 3,000. The number landed and held. Gary Holt looked at the front row, who looked at Faye, who looked at nothing in particular. 3,000 was a real number. 3,000 meant the variable had resources. The man recalibrated visibly. 31, he said. 32. Koda had not moved during any of this. He stood at the end of the polls, and he watched, and somewhere in the second minute of the bidding, his gaze had stopped sweeping the room and settled, with the deliberateness of something decided, on Faye. She felt it before she turned to confirm it, a weight of attention from that direction, different from the weight of the people watching her. She glanced at the dog and found his amber eyes fixed on her face, with an expression that was not recognition. She had only met the dog twice, and both times through chain link and at distance, but was something adjacent to it, something like the early stages of a question. 3,500, the front row said, jumping again. The room went a little quieter. Gary looked at Faye, she looked at Koda. 36, she said. 37, 38, 39. She had $4,200. She had known before she sat down that there was a ceiling to what she could do. She had known and come anyway, because Leonard Dolan had not raised her to stay home when something needed doing just because the arithmetic was uncomfortable. 4,000, she said. The man in the front row shifted his weight. 4,000 for a military working dog with behavioral flags was, by any rational calculation, already more than this animal was worth to his operation. A dog this difficult to handle cost money to manage before he could ever be put to use. The math was starting to bend away from him. He looked at Koda again. The dog was still watching the young woman in the grey jacket. 4-1, the man said, but slowly. 4-1. Faye had $100 of room left. She was aware of this the way you are aware of standing at the edge of something, not panicked, but fully present. She reached into the envelope. She did not take out the money. She simply held it. And then she did something nobody in the room anticipated. She stood up. Not dramatically, not with any performance of it. She simply rose from her folding chair, and when she spoke, her voice was entirely level. "That's Koda," she said. "His call sign is Koda. He was partnered with Chief Warrant Officer Leonard Dolan, 1st Special Forces Group out of Fort Lewis. My father." She paused for exactly one breath. "He served 8 years, 4 overseas. He has a Joint Commendation and a service citation for the Kandahar operation in 2019, where he located 2 soldiers trapped under debris after an IED strike. He did it in 11 minutes. Both soldiers came home." The room was completely silent. Not the silence of discomfort, the silence of people suddenly understanding that they had been missing context. "I have $4,200, Faye continued. "That's every dollar I have. I'm not going to bid against whatever number you want to go to next." She looked at the man in the front row directly. "But I'm asking you to consider who this dog is before you decide what he's worth." The man in the front row held her gaze for a long moment. Then he looked at Koda. The dog had not moved, still at the end of the polls, still watching Faye. But something had shifted in the room's atmosphere, something that Gary Holt could feel and did not quite know how to manage, and he held the gavel without bringing it down. The man in the front row, whose name was Dennis Pruitt, and who had purchased and placed 11 working dogs in private security roles in the past 3 years, uncrossed his arms. He set his bidder's card face down on his knee. He looked at the woman standing 3 rows behind him, and he said nothing for 4 seconds. Then he said, "I'm done." Gary Holt looked around the room. 4,200, do I have? He stopped. Looked around again. 4,200, going once. Koda made a sound. It was not a bark. It was not a growl. It was the sound Faye's father had described to her once, standing at that chain-link fence on a warm Saturday afternoon years ago. Not quite either. Something in between. The sound Koda made when Leonard was taking too long to open a door. She had never heard it herself. She had only heard it described. She recognized it immediately. Going twice. Gary's voice was quieter than it had been all morning. Sold. The gavel came down. What happened next would be described differently by the different people in the room. Dennis Pruitt, when he told the story later, said the dog sat down the moment the gavel hit. The handler on the right catch pole said Koda went still. In a way, he had not once during the entire morning. The Virginia man, who had given up the bidding at 1,300, said he was not an emotional person, but that the atmosphere in the room changed in a way he couldn't precisely account for. Faye walked down the aisle toward the platform. The handlers watched her approach with the wariness of men who had spent 2 weeks managing a dog that did not want to be managed. One of them started to say something, a warning, probably, the reasonable and liability-conscious warning about approaching an animal with Koda's behavioral flags. Faye did not stop walking. She reached the edge of the platform and stopped there, at the bottom of the 2 steps, and she looked at Koda from a distance of maybe 8 feet. The handlers had the poles taut. The dog was watching her. She lowered herself to one knee. She did not reach out. She did not make sounds at him. She simply put herself below his eye level and waited the way Leonard had told her once that you waited with a dog that had seen too much, not pushing, not retreating, just present. For a moment nothing happened. Then Koda took 1 step forward against the tension of the right pole, and the handler, caught off guard by the change in direction, gave an inch of slack without meaning to. And in that inch Koda extended his neck and put his nose against Faye's jaw. One of the handlers exhaled. Faye did not move. She let him take in whatever he was taking in. She was Leonard's daughter. She had grown up in houses that smelled of the same gun oil, and the same wool, and the same particular brand of hand soap her father had used since before she was born, and she understood without being told that this was what Koda was doing. He was not smelling her. He was smelling who she came from. When he pulled back, she put her hand out slowly, palm up, and let him decide. He pressed his forehead against her fingers. Nobody in the room said anything for a while. The paperwork took 40 minutes. There were forms she had not anticipated, liability acknowledgements, behavioral disclosures, a document she had to sign confirming she had been advised that Koda was classified as a dog requiring experienced handling, and that the military accepted no ongoing responsibility for his care or behavior. She signed everything. A clerk processed her cash in silence and gave her a receipt that listed Koda as Belgian Malinois, male, retired MWD, Lot 7, with the same blankness with which you might document a lawnmower. Pete Sabo appeared while she was finishing the last form. He had been in the building the whole time, she realized. Standing near the back wall, out of uniform, one of the anonymous faces she had not registered when she came in. He looked older than she remembered him. He looked like someone who had been trying to think of the right thing to say for about 11 months, and had not yet found it. "Your dad would have," he started. "I know," she said. She meant it kindly. He helped her load Koda into the back of her truck. The dog stepped in without hesitation once the poles were off, which Pete noted aloud and then stopped talking about because the lump in his throat was becoming audible. She drove back toward 29 Palms, with the morning still early and the desert flat and gold on both sides of the highway. Koda rode in the back on a folded blanket she had brought. and he did not pace and he did not whine. He lay with his chin on his paws and watched the passing landscape through the back window with the patience of a dog who had been waiting for something and was no longer waiting. She stopped once at a rest area near the county line and got out and opened the tailgate and sat on it with her legs hanging, and Koda moved up beside her and sat, and they were quiet together for a while with the desert wind moving through and the mountains in the blue distance and the sound of trucks on the highway below. She had a photograph of her father on her phone, one she had taken at that chain-link fence years ago. Leonard and Koda both looking at the camera, her father with his arm resting on the fence posts, not smiling exactly, but with that expression he had that she had always thought was better than smiling. Present, certain, like a man who knew where he was and did not need to announce it. She showed the phone to Koda. She was not sure why she did it. It was not rational, but she held the screen at his level, and Koda looked at it, and then he looked at her, and then he looked at it again, and she could not say exactly what moved across his face because she was not going to pretend she could read it perfectly, but she knew what she felt sitting beside him, which was the particular weight of being near something that had loved the same person you loved and lost the same person you lost, and surviving it alongside them in the most complete sense of that word. She put her phone away. She got back behind the wheel. Koda settled again on the blanket. She drove. The house on Mesquite Road had a yard that Leonard had always meant to fence properly, but never gotten around to. She had gotten around to it in March, on a weekend when she needed something physical to do with her hands. The fence was not beautiful, but it was solid, 7-gauge, wire-staked level and true, the kind of fence that would hold. Koda walked the perimeter of the yard when they arrived, methodical and unhurried, nose down, taking inventory of the space the way he had probably taken inventory of every new environment he had ever been placed in. When he finished, he came back to where Faye was standing near the back porch, and he sat down beside her left leg, and he looked out at the yard. She put her hand on the top of his head. Not a pat, just a hand. They stayed like that, while the afternoon light moved across the desert, and the shadows stretched, and the temperature dropped the way it dropped in the high Mojave. When the sun got low, fast and clean, the sky going from gold to copper to a deep, particular blue she had grown up, watching from this yard, the same yard where Leonard used to stand in the early mornings with his coffee and his silence, looking at nothing and everything, and she used to think she didn't understand what he was looking at until the year he died, and she understood that she had been looking at it too, all along, and just hadn't had a name for it yet. She didn't have a name for it now either. But Koda was beside her, and the fence was sound, and the yard was quiet, and it was enough.